Okay, today we're talking about the problem of evil. Now, I call it a problem. Maybe the better way to think of this is the argument from evil. And the idea is that this is an argument that starts from the premise that there's evil in the world and ends with the conclusion that a certain kind of God does not exist, namely a God who is all powerful and all good. So it's a problem only for people who believe in that kind of God. Otherwise, it's just an argument against God's existence or against the existence of a certain kind of God. Now, there's, as always with these, there's different ways to formulate them. Let me just start you off here with a formulation from David Hume. Okay, Hume sums this up really neatly in a few sentences in his dialogues concerning natural religion. He says this: is God willing to prevent evil but not able? Then he is impotent. Is he able to prevent evil but not willing? Then he's malevolent. Is he both able and willing? Well, whence is evil then? Now, Hume had in mind particularly suffering as the relevant kind of evil, but no matter how you define evil, you could plug that in here and it will work. Let me formalize Hume's argument. Here's a general statement of the problem of evil. Premise one: God is all good, and God wills that there be no evil in the world. Another way to say this is, if God is all good, then he wills only the good. Premise two: if God is all powerful, then whatever he wills, whatever he chooses, occurs. So it follows from that, by hypothetical syllogism, that if God is all good and all powerful, then the world is exclusively good. Only good things would happen. But, premise four, it seems like there is evil in the world. It's not exclusively good. Therefore, it is not the case that God is both all powerful and all good. That follows by modus tollens. Now, here's where the conclusion leaves us. If this argument is sound, then it's possible that there's no God. It's possible that there is a God who is all good but not all powerful. He wanted everything to work out perfectly, but just couldn't pull it off. And it's also possible that there's a God who's all powerful but not all good. He could have made everything work out perfectly, but he didn't want to, because he's just a little bit, I don't know, cruel or something. So those are the possibilities. But what's not left open as a possibility by the argument, if it's sound, is the idea that there is a God who is both all good and all powerful. All right, that's a brief statement of the argument, and Nagel's got a statement of it too. I want to spend the rest of the time here trying to unpack for you a response that theists have made to the problem of evil. And the response we're going to look at is the one developed in your book by Richard Swinburne. A couple of things about Swinburne and about his defense. Okay. First of all, so Swinburne is a real big deal in 20th century philosophy. I think I said before that Alan Plantinga was probably the biggest deal in philosophy of religion in the 20th century, and he's still living. Well, Swinburne is right there with them. Also a big deal, although they have very different approaches to many issues. So Swinburne is retired now, but he was a long time professor of philosophy at the University of Oxford, a school you may have heard of as being the smartest in the world. And he's written tons of books on tons of topics. So this is just kind of a condensed version of his response to the problem of evil. Swinburne, for much of his life, not that this is super relevant, well, it's worth bringing up. For much of his life in his career, he was a member of the Church of England. He was an Anglican. And then at some point in, I don't know, the past 20 or 30 years, he switched to the Eastern Orthodox Church. And but he said he hadn't really changed his beliefs. He just found it more representative of what his beliefs had always been. Now, is that relevant? Probably not for our purposes. In fact, as far as I can tell, Swinburne's Theodicy isn't a specifically Christian one. The problem of evil is a problem for anybody who believes in a certain kind of God who's all good and all powerful. It doesn't matter if you have what religious commitments you have or if you have no religious commitments at all. If you believe in that kind of God, well, this is relevant to you. In the same way, Swinburne's defense doesn't require any kind of belief in any version of Christian faith. And in fact, I think people of many different religious traditions, or none at all, could appropriate his defense. On the other hand, so it's not specifically Christian. On the other hand, it's also not the only kind of defense that theists or Christians, for that matter, have put forward in favor of the problem of evil. I'm sorry, against the problem of evil. It's not the only response that there is. There's many different kinds. In particular, Swinburne's response to the problem of evil turns on a certain conception of free will that many theists won't share. All right, all that to say, it doesn't much matter. His religious tradition is not decisive here. Okay, let's try to unpack his actual argument now. So, Swinburne is giving us a theodicy. What's a theodicy? A theodicy is an explanation of why God would allow evil to occur. So the existence of evil is going to be evidence against the existence of an all-powerful, all-good God, unless there's a possible explanation for why God would allow such evil to occur. Remember premise one of the problem of evil? It said if God is all good, and he wills for only good to happen, he wouldn't will for any evil to happen. Well, Swinburne's theodicy and many theodicies say, wait a minute, there might be very good reasons why good God, an all good God, would will for evil to occur. And so Swinburne is going to say, look, there very well could have been, there were, or might have been, very good reasons for a God to allow evil to occur in the world. Here's his basic argument. Okay. Premise one, if God is good, then he might give us free and responsible choice in full measure. Premise two, if God gives us free and responsible choice in full measure, then he also must allow evil to occur. And that includes both moral and natural evil. So therefore it follows by hypothetical syllogism, if God is good, then he might very well allow evil to occur. So that's the short version of his argument. Now, you have to unpack this a little bit because he's using several technical terms. First of all, what does he mean by free will and what does he mean by free and responsible choice? Okay, here's how Swinburne defines free will. Now, different people are going to define free will differently, and we'll talk about that later. But here's how Swinburne is defining it. This is a libertarian account of free will. For him, free will is the ability to make choices that are not causally necessitated by any prior cause, including God. So if you have free will and you're trying to choose whether you're going to eat a peach for dessert or chocolate cake, then absolutely nothing causally determines or necessitates what your choice will be, not even God. I'll pause. That's well, pause. Before I'm going to go back to his argument in a second. But first, that's what free will is. Now, we have to understand what free will is in order to understand what free and responsible choice is. For him, free and responsible choice is a specific kind of free will. It's the free will to make significant choices between good and evil, which make a big difference to the agent and to others and to the world. So maybe you've got free will, but only free will to make a certain trivial kind of choice. Like, for example, well, maybe to eat peach or chocolate pie. Not a lot hangs on that. It's kind of trivial. But what if you've got free will to make the decision about whether you're going to, oh, I don't know, you know, rescue someone from being hit by a car? Well, the choice, that's very significant. It's a choice between doing good and between not doing good, between doing evil. And it makes a big difference to you and to others and to the world, right? So free and responsible choice is free will to make undetermined choices about stuff that really matters a lot. Now, if you got those definitions straight in your head, let's go back to his argument, okay? So he says, if God is good, then he might give us, wouldn't have to, but he might very well give us free and responsible choice in full measure. Now, what Swinburne is saying is that the ability to make free and responsible choices, undetermined choices about stuff that really counts, choices between good and evil that have a big impact on you and on other people on the world, the ability to make those kinds of choices is a good thing, right? Well, that's what Swinburne thinks. That is a good thing for God to create. It is good for God to create creatures that have free and responsible choice in that sense. And so it's the sort of thing that a good God, an all-good God, might very well give to his creatures. It makes them almost co-participators, co-creators of the universe, because their actions help create the future. And Swinburne thinks that is a very good thing, a very worthwhile thing for God to create as creatures with free and responsible choice. But here's the catch, premise two. In order for God to give creatures free and responsible choice in full measure, he's got to allow evil to occur in the world. Now why do I think that? Because remember, free and responsible choices are choices that are not determined by anything, including God. So if you make creatures like that, they might do anything. They might choose to do good stuff. They might choose to do really bad stuff. The stakes are high there. And in order for them to have their choices be ones that have significant consequences, they also have to have available to them certain kinds of challenges to overcome in the world. So, for example, well, you might think, for example, about the pandemic, the COVID pandemic. That's a kind of natural evil. And the fact of COVID and this pandemic in the world makes it possible for us to make certain kind of choices that we wouldn't otherwise. Am I going to wear my mask or not? Am I going to help spread this disease around or not? Or am I going to sacrificially give my life in some important way to help prevent the spread of COVID? So it makes natural evils make possible to us a range of free and responsible choices which we wouldn't otherwise have had. So if God's going to give us free, responsible choice in full measure, he's got to make possible evil. Because if he determined what our choices would be, or just made this a safe world where it was all one big padded room where nobody was going to get hurt no matter what they did, we wouldn't really have free and responsible choice in full measure. Okay, so his idea is that's why we've got free and responsible choice. I've already said something about natural evil, but let me explain to you his definitions. So a moral evil is evil that's caused deliberately or negligently allowed by humans. That's stuff that's our fault. So if I punch somebody in the face deliberately, well, I chose to do that. I deliberately brought it about. Or I negligently didn't pay attention to whether something, I don't know. I can't think of something, but somebody got hurt from it. That would be a moral evil. Okay? Now, natural evil is evil which is not deliberately caused by humans. So like earthquakes or tsunamis, those are natural evils. It's not our fault. Okay, now, why is it that we need why moral evil is necessary in order for us to have free and responsible choice. But here's what Swinburne says. Swinburne says, in order to create free creatures, God had to create them depraved. What does depraved mean? Well, depravity is the desire for evil things. So Swinburne thinks we don't really have free and responsible choice unless we do have desires for evil things. Why would he say that? If I have no desire for evil things, then I would always inevitably choose what is good. But if I inevitably and always choose what is good, I'm not really making a free choice. So if I have no desires for evil things, I'm not really free because I can't really go both ways. So that's why there's got to be evil in the world. God's got to make creatures who are a little bit bad, who want bad stuff, in order to make them free and therefore responsible. Right, so that's why we need moral evil. Now, not only that, but suffering plays a role. What about human suffering? Suffering plays a role in this whole picture too. Swinburne says being allowed to suffer in order to make possible a great good is a privilege, even if that privilege is forced upon you. And those who suffer at the hands of others and thereby make possible the good of those others who have free and responsible choice are themselves benefited in this respect. Okay, what's he talking about? Look, in order to have free and responsible choice, my choices between good and evil have to have really high stakes for myself and other people. So that means I might cause other people to suffer by my choices. So let's say my parents leave me in charge of my little brother to babysit him, right? Well, I've got the choices I make about whether I'm going to take care of my little brother or not might have high stakes for him. He might suffer because of my bad choices. Well, here's what Swinburne is saying. My brother's vulnerability to the harm that I can do him or bring about is actually a privilege for him because it's making real the fact of my free and responsible choice. If there were no high stakes involved for anybody about my choices, whether I feed him cherry pie or a mud pie, if one of those choices wasn't really going to make him sick, then there wouldn't really be high stakes involved. I wouldn't really have free and responsible choice. If we were all playing in a padded room, there's no free and responsible choices. So the fact that it's not a padded room, the fact that my little brother can really get hurt depending on my choices, makes real a certain great good. That is my freedom. And so his vulnerability to suffering at my hands is actually a good thing that's been given to him. He's made possible a great good. He's been made kind of a hero, a moral hero, even though he didn't sign up for that and didn't want it. But God made him a moral hero. By his vulnerability makes my freedom real. Now, that raises another question here. Does God have a right to create a world where people involuntarily suffer for a greater good? Does God have a right to create a world where, to leave me in charge of my little brother, where even though he doesn't want to suffer in order to create my freedom, he very well may? Swinburne says, yeah, God can create that kind of world because, like a parent, he's the one who creates and sustains the world. He's got a right to. Just like my parent has a right to leave me in charge of my little brother. Furthermore, he couldn't ask anybody's permission prior to creating us. It's not like in the analogy with my little brother, my parents could ask my little brother, hey, do you want to create this great good of freedom and responsibility by being vulnerable to suffering? We weren't around to be asked. God had to make a decision about this before we were created. And so he had a right to do that. All right, to pull these strands together, here's the big idea for Swinburne. Creating a world with free and responsible choice in it has upsides and downsides. And Swinburne says the upsides outweigh the downsides. So a good God could choose to create a world with moral evil in it. Now the upsides are this: free and responsible choice is a good thing. And even the suffering that is necessary in order to make possible this great good, that's also a good thing. The downsides, obviously, are that this requires human depravity, desire for evil things, and that's a bad thing. But human suffering resulting from human depravity is a bad thing. Look, people suffer from our moral choices, don't they? That's not good. But the upsides outweigh the downsides, says Swinburne, and so a good God might very well choose to create a world with moral evil in it. Okay, so far he's given us an explanation of why a good God would create a world with moral evil in it. Now, though, that still leaves the question about what about natural evils? What about like the earthquakes and the tsunamis and forest fires that kill Bambi's mother and stuff like that? What about that? Why did God have to create a world with that stuff in it? And now he turns to that. All right. Natural evil makes available to humans certain specially worthwhile kinds of choice. In the first place, the operation of natural laws producing evils gives humans knowledge, if they choose to seek it, how to bring about or prevent or remedy such evils themselves. For example, the law of gravity. The law of gravity brings about the fact that, combined with other certain laws, that maybe like a tree might fall across the road and smash a car and hurt somebody. That's a natural evil. But the existence of the natural law of gravity gives humans knowledge of how to bring about, well, they can either bring about more car smashings or dropping other objects on cars, or how to prevent or remedy such things. Hey, we want to protect cars from trees getting dropped on them. Here's how we can do it. And the same goes for, say, like curing diseases. If we learn about the spread of diseases, we can either choose to bring it about more effectively or how to stop the spread of the diseases more effectively. So natural evil, therefore, increases the range of significant choice and makes possible certain kinds of action. And that's a good thing. What about the suffering of animals? Remember how Bambi's mother was killed in the fire? Somebody might object here and say, look, animals don't have free will, but they do suffer from these natural evils. And Swinburne, your story was that natural evil made possible free and responsible choices for humans, but they don't for the deer, because animals don't have free will. So their suffering seems unjustified. It doesn't do them any good. Here's the reply that Swinburne has. He says, you're right, animals don't have free will, but animals do perform significant intentional actions. And natural evil gives them the opportunity to perform those kinds of significant intentional actions. So Bambi's mother might heroically struggle to get Bambi free of the forest fire before she herself succumbs. Sorry to bring this up. Obviously, I was scarred by this as a child, this movie. Animals can rescue one another, or they might struggle a long time heroically to get food for themselves. And there's something noble about an animal that survives trudging through the snow on its last energy in order to get a food source or something like that. That's a significant intentional action. And the fact of natural evils, famines and hungers and forest fires and so forth, provides them the opportunity to exercise those significant intentional actions. Right, so again, when it comes to natural evil, there's upsides and downsides. The upsides of natural evil are that they make available to humans especially worthwhile kinds of choice we wouldn't have otherwise if we were playing in a padded room. And then also it makes available to animals significant intentional actions, and those are good things. The downsides, of course, are all that pain and suffering, right, that natural evil is involved. But Swinburne wants to say the upsides outweigh the downsides And therefore, a good God might very well choose to make a world that includes natural evils. So here's what Swinburne's done so far. He wants to say the goods, the upsides produced by natural and moral evil outweigh the downsides. So there's nothing irrational about a good God creating these evils. Maybe you're not yet persuaded. You think, wait a minute, no, all the pain and the suffering and depravity that's involved in evil, it doesn't outweigh the goods. The bad outweighs the good here. This world stinks, and all the nice things about it don't outweigh them. They don't make it worthwhile. I'm not persuaded. Here's Swinburne's fallback position. He says, okay, if you're not persuaded so far, there's also this other possibility, and that is, if there's a God, there might very well be an afterlife. God could create an afterlife. And so it's very possible that the goods produced by the evils of this world in the afterlife outweigh the evils in this life. Sufferers are compensated in the afterlife for all that they had to go through in this life. And you might think this. You might think, well, hold on a second, Swinburne. You haven't given us any proof that there is an afterlife. The point is, he doesn't have to. All he's trying to show is that the fact of evil doesn't necessarily imply that there is no God of this certain sort. And if the mere possibility of an afterlife creates the possibility that a good God would create a world with evil in it. He's just trying to stake out the possibility that the existence of God is compatible with evil. And if there's the possibility of an afterlife, then certainly there's the possibility that a good God is compatible with this kind of evil world. All right, now you're probably lost in the forest at this point. I'm sorry about that. The truth is, Swinburne's position is it's very nuanced, and he's thought through a lot of things seriously, even things that you might think are ludicrous at first. But he has thought through it all dead seriously. I tried to pull together the main threads. What are some remaining worries that we might have about Swinburne's? There might be many that you've got. Here's a few. Here's the first worry. You still might feel that the costs of freedom aren't worth all the trouble that it causes. So God made a bad choice. A good God would not choose to create a world like this, because the evils they still outweigh all the supposed upsides that Swinburne has staked out there. Here's another worry. You might think that, look, God could have done better than he did. If there is a God, God could have given us free and responsible choice in full measure, and yet still have prevented a lot of the evils that we see in the world. For example, let's say you got a paper cut yesterday. Couldn't God have created just as much freedom and responsibility, and yet prevented that paper cut? I mean, wasn't that just gratuitous? There have to be that too, in addition to everything else? So that might be one worry. And you might just say, not just this paper cut, but wouldn't we have still had tons of free and responsible choice in full without the Holocaust? I mean, didn't we have plenty of opportunities for high stakes moral decisions without that? Okay, so God could have done better. A good God wouldn't have made this world. You might worry that. And then finally this. You might think, some theists are going to say they don't like this idea of free will, the in Swinburne's sense of it. Because according to Swinburne's idea of free will, God doesn't determine what is going to happen in the world. Human choices are undetermined by anything, including God's own plans. And so a theist might say, whoa, a God whose plans can be frustrated? That's not really an all-powerful God. Free will, in Swinburne's sense, is not compatible with the existence of an all-powerful God. If he's not controlling human choices and all that follows from them, it's really ridiculous to say he's all-powerful. He doesn't have power over what's going to happen to me if he's tied his hands behind his back when it comes to human choices. Those are a few worries. Maybe there's good answers to all of them. Maybe not. Let's talk about it in class.